Hi, I'm Urmi Desai, and this is the Move Smartly Show. This week, it's time for our monthly consumer Q&A segment that we call The Situation. In this segment, I ask my co-host and colleague, John Pasalis, broker and president at Realosophy Realty here in Toronto, to respond to the questions that you're asking about all your real estate buying, selling, and renting moves across the Toronto area market. You can send your questions about your own real estate situations to be addressed in future episodes to askjohn@movesmartly.com, or you can leave us a comment on our YouTube channel where you're watching this episode. Leave us a comment right under it so we can get to your questions there. And if you find this show useful, please like, subscribe, follow, leave a positive review, and share so that more people can find this show and benefit from the information. We are almost at 10,000 subscribers on YouTube on our Move Smartly channel, so that is great, and we'd love to hit that number soon. So thank you, as always, for all your support. We really appreciate it. And now, on to the episode. Hi, John.
Hello again.
It is time for one of your favorite segments.
It is. I love these. We get into the nitty gritty of people's real life situations, issues, challenges. So it's always a good discussion.
Excellent. So, John, to start, a little bit of an unusual
Yes,
situation to start with.
we're going to change it up this month. We're going to kick off with my own situation, my own little curveball real estate situation that I thought had some good insights and kind of takeaways for consumers. So I thought we'd kick off with my own little story. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. So you recently posted on Instagram with the title, How a Small Floor Repair Turned into a $100,000 Renovation, about the less glamorous side of real estate investing. When
Mhm.
you talked about how a small floor repair at a residential apartment building that you co-own with family recently turned out to be a much bigger disaster. Let's take a look.
So how does a small flooring issue turn into a $100,000 renovation disaster? I'll tell you. So the basement apartment in a rental building I own suddenly had some flooring issues, and we pulled up the floor. We noticed rotted floor joists everywhere. The wood joists were actually just sitting on the soil. There was no concrete, and after 70 years, the moisture termites had completely destroyed them. We quickly realized there's no easy fix for this. The only solution was just to gut the whole apartment and basically rebuild it from scratch. So what started as a small flooring repair ended up being a complete gut renovation. Now, I've had the property for a long time, so it's not the end of the world and it's just part of the business. But what stuck with me was that if a buyer was buying a similar property today with the same type of flooring issue, their inspector would note it, but they would have no idea of the extent of the damage underneath the floors. And that's why when I tour homes with clients and I see deficiencies that I think might be a sign of a bigger issue underneath, I'll sometimes tell them to just walk away. Not because I know it's a problem, but because I know the chances of it being a huge issue are higher. And that's a risk you don't want to take. Small issues can turn into six-figure surprises.
Wow. So, John, that looks and sounds really stressful.
Yeah, it was. So I'm going to unpack what happened. I mean, just to unpack for the average person and what I think are the takeaways for the average consumer. One of them I kind of touched on in the video, but like I said, it's a basement apartment in a building, had some kind of soggy floor issues. It sort of didn't feel right. So we went to go open it up and repair it. And we saw, as I said in the video, these just rotted floor joists. So if people don't know what a joist is, it's just like the beams that usually the floors sit on. And what was odd was that these were all just sitting on dirt, which is not typical. Like typically, if you think about most basements, they have concrete, right? And in this unit, we knew it was elevated. We knew that there were floor joists because you hear the floor is a little hollow. But what people used to do back in the 50s and 60s is they would, this before the time of like subfloors and insulation, all this stuff, what they would do, so you don't have a basement apartment walking on concrete, they would put like 2x4s, right? And they put them on the ground and they put the subfloor. So it added a little bit of a barrier, a bit of insulation. So that's kind of what we assumed the flooring was like. I mean, no one knows. I mean, we'd never opened the floor. We just assumed that it was like, and this obviously, we've had the building for a long time. So this issue just came up. But as we're opening it up, it's just like these rotted joists because after 70 years, between moisture and the building had termites in that location. They'd all just deteriorated, right? And once you just start pulling them up, it's like everything's crumbling, right? And there's no, like, very quickly we realized, like within the first day of us just doing demo, that there's no easy fix. Like once you just start ripping up the floor, there's no easy fix. Like, what do you do? Just rip out the floor and then just replace them with floor joists that are going to sit on dirt again? That you're just going to have other problems. And it just became just very quickly we realized like the only solution is just to gut the whole place and do it properly. I think back at the time they didn't do that unit properly. I don't know why. We did some rentals in another basement unit. It had concrete. It was kind of a bit more normal. For whatever reason, this unit just they didn't finish it properly. Maybe they got lazy. Who knows? So we had to just gut the whole apartment. And you know, the challenge is, I mean, there's a couple of things I think that stand out. I mean, number one is, as I said in my little Instagram video, you know, like what stood out to me was, you know, if someone was buying a home and they just saw that issue, you wouldn't know what's underneath it. You wouldn't know the extent of the damage, right? Again, like the average person might think, oh, okay, it's just like a little bit of a saggy floor. You just remove it, replace the 2x4s, and you fix it. So you don't know how bad it is, which is why sometimes, like even when I'm out with clients and I see things that are odd, see things that aren't normal, see things that make me in my gut feel like maybe that is an issue to a bigger problem. Like a lot of the times I'll tell them, I'm like, you may want to reconsider it. And like I said in the video, it's not because I know for sure it's an issue. You, I just know that it's a higher probability of an issue. Do you know what I mean? And the question is, if you're spending all this money on a home, do you want to buy a home that has a higher likelihood of a very big problem, right? That needs to be addressed. So sometimes it's important to be cautious because we hear all these horror stories of, you know, people who buy homes that are money pits, that are problems, that are issues. And again, you can do your due diligence to some point, like I said, and it wouldn't be an inspector's fault if they didn't spot this. And I think that's the important takeaway because they can't see through walls. It's not like the floor was damaged in the entire apartment. It was isolated. It's just that as we started ripping it up, you saw that it was worse, right? So the inspector can't see behind the walls or under the flooring. So it would largely have gone unnoticed, right? So sometimes I think when we see things as agents in the business, I mean, obviously I see a ton of homes and I've seen a lot of problems. You just sometimes want to hit pause and say, maybe not this one. You know what I mean? For all of these reasons. So that's, I think, the first key takeaway that I think is relevant to the average person. And, you know, in our case, obviously, it's not the end of the world. We've had the property for a long time. I mean, it's just part of business. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the end of the world. But again, if you're a first time buyer, you move into your home, you got to spend 100 grand. That's usually not good, right? Now, the other thing that stood out as I was doing this is when you start, and this is like a lot of people don't understand how renos spiral out of control. And this is like a very good example of how renos spiral out of control. And it's kind of out of your control. Like you rip everything up and you realize this kind of part of the basement wasn't built properly, number one. There are no weeping tiles, and weeping tiles just capture, you know, groundwater around the perimeter, kind of funnel. I mean, they didn't have sump pumps back then. So we kind of knew that, but we have to do that. We've got to do waterproofing, but then also a lot of the old mechanical things in the home are old in the basement, right? So there's dirt, there's the sewer drain. Well, that's all clay. What are you going to do? Are you going to leave a clay drain underground? Clay drains deteriorate and they break over time, right? So we're going to spend all this money fixing this basement with these old systems that if they break, we've just got to rip it up again and replace it. So we're replacing drains. The sewer stack is cast iron. You got to fix that. Some of the plumbing's galvanized steel. You got to replace that. So you have to do all of these things properly. And I think this is the other takeaway, that when people get into renos, sometimes, especially when it's expensive and they weren't planning it, and it's a natural instinct, they cut corners, right? They don't do the things they should be doing. They don't do all the things because They didn't plan to spend X thousand dollar. But when you have everything open, I mean, that's the time to do them, because if you have an issue and you got to start repairing it after the fact, it costs you even more money, right? So like if what's it going to cost us to replace our sewer drain? I don't know, an extra 1,500 bucks, couple of grand. I mean, I have no idea. I'm just making that number up. I've been meeting the plumber in a bit. But if we didn't replace it and something broke after the fact, after we finished the basement, it'd be way more than that. We'd have to spend like 10 grand to break up tiles, floors again, concrete, dig it up, and it damages the unit. So this is where spending a little bit of money today avoids you having bigger issues down the road. And I think this is, again, a challenge when people are deep into renos and things are spiraling out of control. If you're going to cut corners, I think those are the things that you don't want to cut on, like the mechanical things that could lead to bigger issues down the road. So that is my little recent situation. And again, like I said, I thought I'd share it because I do think that there are some takeaways for the average person.
Better we learn from an experienced person like you than face this ourselves. So thank you for that, John.
Yeah.
So let's start with question 2. Hi, John. We're experienced real estate buyers. We've owned multiple properties over the years. We currently live in a condo downtown, and we plan to upsize to a home we just purchased, also downtown. While we don't need to sell our current condo, even though the rent we earn on it doesn't fully cover our carrying costs, we'd prefer to it as it represents a drain on our monthly cash flow. However, selling the unit today in today's market would mean we only break even on the price we paid for it several years ago, which means taking a $30,000 to $40,000 loss once we factor in land transfer fees and other transaction costs like agent fees. What should we do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And quite honestly, it's one, I mean, we've had some versions of these in the past. Like a lot of people are faced with this position where they bought a property. In this case, it's actually worth what they paid for it, but they're going to be short a little bit after accounting for transaction costs. So, do you sell at a loss um, or just float it and be cash flow negative? And I think in previous episodes, I mentioned that I have a strong bias of not selling if you're short, right, on your cash flow. And I think, typically I have that strong bias. And I think maybe there's some situations where I would kind of reconsider it. In a situation like this, if you are strained financially by this property where every month you feel house poor, right? Should I sell it? And my instinct is probably yes. Because I mean, I think here's the broader way to think of it. If I've been in real estate for a while, I bought and sold several properties, I probably made a lot of money. Okay. You're not gonna win every bet. So to be down 30 grand on one, if you've done 4 or 5 purchases in the past and have accumulated a decent amount of wealth, is not the end of the world. And for me, I think that's probably how I would look at it, especially if I'm financially stressed. You know what I mean? If holding it means it strains my finances, I would probably sell. If it doesn't, I probably wouldn't lose sleep over it. I'd probably just hold it. Like if I'm not stressed financially, if I'm not over leveraged. So again, I think it is very situational, personal, but certainly if I felt strained financially, it's just not worth it. I'd rather unload it, say, okay, that one I didn't do well. I lost 30 grand, but net I'm up. I have this house. I have, it's that equity is going to pay down a significant amount of my mortgage. So probably in a situation like that, I mean, I probably would sell because it's just like not worth the stress. And on top of that, if you have a vacancy, I mean, especially in a slow market, the rental market's sluggish now. So if you're vacant, your tenant's not paying rent or whatever, you can't handle that. It's not a great situation to be in. So I think in a situation like that, I probably lean towards selling. And again, obviously that decision is a function of how much you're short. If I'm losing 100 grand, I probably would find a way to buckle down. You know what I mean? For 30, I probably would just move on and not sweat it.
And again, John, a reality that we are now seeing commonly in the GTA or the Toronto area. A few years ago, there'd be no problem with making that little bit of appreciation to even sell. in a couple years from the time you bought it. But we're now in this very new normal,
Yeah.
which I understand from you and other experts is going to continue for some time in this condo sector.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think anyone's expecting the market to rebound anytime soon. Rental market's sluggish. Listings are quite high for sale. So it's a sluggish market. So yeah, I think you just gotta, you're right. You gotta, if you're gonna hold on to, you gotta hold on for the long term.
All right, well, hopefully that helps. And now we have 3 questions that viewers of our last month's situation session left for us on our YouTube comments. So
Oh,
thank you very
great.
much
Nice.
to all our viewers for watching and asking your own cues. So let's start with question number 3. Hello, Urmi. Would be great if you could share some insights on if you guys, good, he's referring to you, would be great if you guys could share some insights on freehold versus condo townhouses from a long-term perspective. I eventually may leave Canada for better financial gains in 5 to 8 years. Would it make more sense to buy a condo townhouse rather than a freehold if I plan to rent it out while I'm gone, only to return once every 2 to 3 years, because the maintenance would be taken care of by the condo corp? Any inputs in this regard are appreciated. At do 234. So what can you
Nice.
suggest?
So I think the opening question was which one I recommend from a long-term perspective, right? And I'm going to interpret that. And usually when people ask me that, they mean in terms of appreciation, usually, right? And of course, appreciation is part of it, but part of it are, of course, the considerations they mentioned of maintenance fees and things like that. So when we think about longer term appreciation, I mean, there's, 2 ways to think about this. First is the neighborhood. Like, so we have, think about it this way. There's like the general GTA rate of house price appreciation, right? And then we have local dynamics. So certain neighborhoods across the GTA will appreciate at a higher or lower rate than others, right? And there are different reasons that might be behind that. Again, demographics, just different local trends. So some areas will outperform, some areas will underperform. So the first is to think about what areas are you buying in, and is that going to be a better investment or not, or is it going to underperform? Then isolating out the area, then of course, it's the different house types. And of course, the bigger differences are going to be between like semis and detached versus condominium apartments, because those are 2 very different house types. The closer the house types are, like townhomes, freehold versus condo townhomes, you're probably not going to see as big of a difference in sort of the rate of growth, I'd say. So with all that said, I mean, I think it makes sense to me to be mindful of where you're buying. And I do tend to agree, if someone's going to be away for a long time, there is a lot of benefit to having a condo townhome, because I mean, you don't have the issues that I had. You just have a basement leak or some issue or damage, so you got to spend a ton of money doing repairs, right? And I think those things you see a little bit more vulnerabilities potentially in like a freehold townhome, whereas in condo townhomes, you don't really have to worry about the building envelope, bigger repairs, roof leaks, things like that. Your maintenance fees cover that. So if that's their plan, that they might be away for a while, probably it's just lower maintenance and less of a headache. Even if the rate of appreciation is a little lower, maybe it's just worth it for not having to worry about the management.
Great. Well, hopefully that helps Can Do. And let's go on to question 4, also asked on our last YouTube segment. As a prospective first-time homebuyer, can you talk a little bit about the condo status certificate and what to look for? And this is from at Erlaw. And so, John, when you do that, I would assume that the condo status certificate, first of all, does it apply to both condo apartment buildings and townhouses?
Yeah, so it's basically required by law. So what a status certificate is, I mean, there's 2 parts to it. The actual status certificate is basically a financial snapshot of the condominium corporation and a snapshot of your unit, right? So it's usually like a 5-page document. In addition to that, they give you all these other documents that are related to the condo corporation, right? So one key thing to keep in mind is that when you buy a condo, you're not just buying your unit, you're basically becoming a shareholder of a bigger complex, whether it's a building, whether it's stacked townhomes with underground parking garage, and you are responsible for maintaining that whole complex, right? And the status certificate gives you an idea of how well managed that condominium corporation is, right? And the status certificate is actually very easy to read. It tells you if the condominium corporation is being sued by anyone, if they are involved in any lawsuits suing other people. It tells you if this unit owner has done anything against the condo rules and is being forced to make changes. It tells you the current budget for the condominium corporation, if it's going to impact maintenance fees. It tells you the amount of money they have in the reserve fund. So the reserve fund, think of it as like a savings account to manage long-term expenses. So it gives you all of that information. So in terms of what to look for, I mean, if there's a few things you want to look for. I mean, you want to look at firstly, how well is the building managed? Do the maintenance fees make sense for the property? Are they too high? Are they too low? I mean, and you can sense that even just by looking at what the maintenance fees are relative to other buildings, right? And it gives you a snapshot of how well managed the property is. But the other key thing that I think is critical is looking at the reserve fund and the reserve fund study. So reserve fund study is basically like usually a third party company's hired, and it basically says based on this building, these are the expenses we expect you to make over time, right? This is how much money you need to be putting into your reserve fund each year. And it tells you whether you're on track. So, for example, for 2025, the reserve fund study might say this condominium corp should have $2 million in their reserve fund, right? But if you look at the status certificate and it says they only have $500,000, well, you have a big problem. You have $1.5 million shortfall, right? So you need to understand why that is, because what usually happens in that case is that the unit owners have to make up that difference, and they make it up by doing what's called a special assessment. So they basically will either charge unit owners like a lump sum and say everyone's got to put up 20 grand up front this year so we can top up this reserve fund, or they might add like an extra $300 or $400 or $500 a month for the next 2-3 years to get that money back, to basically be able to save that. So these are the red flags, the kind of the big ones you want to be keeping an eye on. But again, this is something I should have clarified from the beginning. This is typically something a lawyer reviews. I mean, I read them out of curiosity, but when we have a client who is buying a condominium, their offer is typically conditional on their lawyer reviewing and approving the status certificate. And good lawyers, I mean, I'm just giving you a couple things to learn. They look at a lot more stuff, and they'll give you a list of things that stand out that maybe might impact your use of the property, even in some cases. So, you get your lawyer to review it, you outline any concerns you have, and they kind of give you an overview. But that's just a couple of examples I gave of things that stand out usually to me.
All right. So tying that back actually to Candu's question of whether a townhouse condo would be a safer bet when it comes to maintenance, and going back to your own problems with your
Yeah.
apartment. I guess not necessarily if you buy into a building and you don't suss out, or your lawyer doesn't suss out this tricky situation with the reserve fund. Because does that mean that if a repair suddenly becomes necessary and there's not enough in the reserve fund, then that special assessment could be applied to all condo owners?
Yeah, 100%. That happens sometimes. If they have to do a major repair that wasn't planned for, it's bigger than expected. A lot of times what they do first is actually borrow the money. So they'll have a line of credit or something like that. But then over time, eventually, yes, they have to do a special assessment from the unit owners to pay it off, right? And if we go back to the other example of the condo townhome, there are certain things that make the condo fees more unpredictable, right? So if you're an above grade condo townhome with like a garage that you drive into, and we see a lot in the suburbs, those have fewer risks than the ones downtown that have underground garages. Like underground garages are just like basements. They're submerged, they're more vulnerable to water leaks and structural, all sorts of issues, right? So depending on how it's built, there are certain things like that you sometimes make it a little bit more vulnerable to have a very, unexpected expense pop up, right? Whereas just a traditional condo townhome, without an underground garage is probably going to be a little bit less vulnerable if it's well managed.
All right. Well, good additional things to think about in terms of avoiding those red flags when you can. So that leads us to our last question, John. Question 5, also from our YouTube channel. John, now I'm going to set this up by saying you've recently talked about the HST cuts on new construction for first-time buyers that both the PM, Mark Carney, and the Leader of Opposition, Pierre Poilievre, are campaigning on as we head into a federal election later in April. And the question from a viewer asks is a good one about how exactly these cuts play out for buyers. So at Raid 2Bay asks, when you buy a pre-con condo, is the HST included in the sale price? If so, as a first-time buyer, would you get an HST rebate, essentially lowering the mortgage cost that you pay?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to clarify, Carney is talking about waiving the HST on homes that are priced under $1 million. Only for first-time buyers. Pierre Poilievre is talking about doing it for any buyer. And he's actually just today, as we're filming this week, announced that he's increasing that to 1.3 million. He originally had said everything up to 1 million as well. But I think he needed to one-up Carney and kind of make this race a little bit more competitive. So he bumped it up to 1.3 million. Now,
and if I'm not mistaken, he may have targeted that to first-time buyers only.
No, he's doing it to everybody, which again, I did a video this week about why I tend to not agree with that. Like our condo market is driven by investors. When you do to everybody, it's like issuing a tax subsidy to the very investors that push condo prices as high as they were. I mean, I don't think that makes sense. Some of the housing advocates think it does, but I mean, I don't think the government should be subsidizing speculators, but that's just me. So going back to the original question, the HST rebate, you actually don't really see it necessarily as a consumer because it's accounted for in the price, right? So builders, to keep it simple, just assume you qualify for the HST rebate, of course. I mean, most people do. And they reflect that into the purchase price. So the purchase price actually includes HST. So just to be clear, the right now the exemption's only I think up to the first 450, or it's actually 350, and then it's like tiered where it gradually gets reduced. So it's really only under the first 450,000. Anything above that you pay HST on. Now, again, when you go to a condo, it's not like they here's the price plus HST. They don't do that. The price includes the HST, and it includes sort of the rebate from the original first 450,000. So what they're realistically going to do, you as a consumer, it's almost transparent, but it will realistically lower the price that builders are charging. So the sticker price in theory should come down, right? But you as a consumer, you don't get a check, you don't get a rebate. It actually just lowers the sale price, if that makes sense.
It seems less transparent, though. Do the builders have to show you that they lowered the price?
No. Okay. That's actually a very good question. They do not have to show you that they lowered the price. I mean, in theory, they could keep the price higher, but the reality is many of them wants to sell. So and that's actually the better example of that because this is a sales tax, right? It's a little bit different from development charges, which the city charges, which are kind of a hidden tax, right? Sales taxes are on the sale price. Development charges are a bit different because, yes, the cities can remove the development charges or reduce them substantially. And if they do, some builders can just take that and not lower the price, and that just flows through to their profits, right? So they're not required to pass that savings along. The reality is many of them in today's market probably will because the market's frozen, right? If the market was booming, no builder is going to pass on the tax savings to consumers. They have to be idiots to do that because builders are trying to maximize their profits. They have a duty to their shareholders. So they're not idiots because of they're prioritizing consumers. It's just they're in business to maximize profits. They would not flow those savings through to consumers when you have a lineup of people willing to pay top dollar for condos. In today's market, the market's dead, right? So there's an incentive for them to lower the price to actually move units and sell units rather than doing nothing for the next 2 years. So most likely these taxes will flow through, the city should probably lower development charges, but probably add some kind of capped timeline on them to just encourage builders to get projects off the ground and rather not sit on them and try to capture that as profit. But certainly, it'll probably flow through to lower prices if these things happen.
Interesting. So there is a lot of detail to these measures as we try to evaluate the different things being proposed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and they're like I said, they're different policies. They're different. They're targeting different people. And everyone has their views on which one is better. But maybe depending on how many housing policy announcements we do, maybe we'll do an episode on Pierre's plan versus Carney's plan and possibly Jagmeet's before the election at the end of April.
Sounds like a plan. Well, thank you, John. That's our questions for this month. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners for your amazing questions. Again, keep them coming. Ask John at movesmartly.com or just leave them below this video on YouTube if that's where you're catching us. And we look forward to answering more of your questions next month. And hopefully, John, your disaster of a reno will maybe be a little bit more under control by then.
It's under control now. It's fine. We'll be okay.
We shouldn't worry too much about you.
No, we'll be fine.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.